Alright, so here we are with Chapter 4, Key Issue 3. The big thing about this is why is access to folk and popular culture unequal? This is going to be really because of two things. One, because of income or development of your country, and two, government restrictions. So instantly right now you should be thinking about how income kind of affects access to folk and pop culture, and then also how governments are now kind of restricting access to popular culture. So you should be thinking about that almost right away. Um, so important thing for this obviously is popular culture's main mode of diffusion is hierarchical. Again, that means if you have access to the internet, if you have access to television, you're going to be included in it. If you don't, you're going to miss it. It's going to skip over some people, but it's still going to rapidly spread throughout the culture. Keep in mind, electronic media is by far the main reason why it's spreading throughout the world. Popular culture, obviously. Um, this is in the last 50 years, this is going to be by far the biggest reason why popular culture has spread. Now, keep in mind, this is now kind of making a blur between popular culture, okay, and folk culture. Because now a lot of folk cultures are, or folk settings or folk areas are now having access to kind of this popular culture. So now start thinking about a little bit how that is going to affect them, how they might start losing the folk culture because popular culture is now imposing on their everyday lives as opposed to before where they were kind of isolated. Um, at the same time that you have folk culture or popular culture embedding into folk culture can also tend to become popular culture. Obviously, this is a folk garment from Africa, and they've taken very similar traditions, and now on websites you have these sweatshirts available. Obviously they don't wear sweatshirts over here. You have the whole typical hoodie pocket thing here. So obviously you now have tendencies because of media. You're able to get exposed to folk culture, and you can now start to embed that a little bit into mainstream popular culture. Again, here we have native southwestern United States, northern Mexico, kind of artistic patterns here. And now today in popular culture, you have that as kind of a backpack design. So they're taking kind of that folk culture idea and embedding into popular culture, kind of for mass production or mass sale throughout. Keep in mind the principal obstacle to access to popular culture is lack of access to electronic media. The main reason for this is lack of money, and then again, restrictions on the media. So if you don't have money for a TV or computer, you're not going to have the same access as everyone else. Think about right now, many of you guys have your iPads, you have your cell phones. Keep in mind, if you didn't have your cell phones, okay, you didn't have your iPads, would you have access to media? Yes, but it wouldn't be constant. You wouldn't have as much access to popular culture. So if you don't have that stuff, obviously you're not going to be able to be exposed to that popular culture. This is big when you kind of look at other places. Obviously, these people do not have as much access to popular culture. However, these people now have a television, so they're able to have a little more access to popular culture. You can see they have a little more everyday items that you would see in popular culture throughout the world. The biggest medium that popular culture is going to travel through or spread through is television. So if you see it, or if it's filmed in America and you can see it in Japan, it might spread over there instantly. It's by far the most popular leisure activity in the world. In the United States, we actually lead the world in that category. Not really sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but on average, the world views 3 hours per day. In the United States, we're almost up to 5 hours today watching TV on average. Keep in mind, Americans spend most of our free time, okay, watching television. All right. Keep in mind how much that exposes us to different popular culture through advertising, through entertainment, anything you see on TV, advertising, TV shows, sports. We're gaining more and more of that culture throughout. Keep in mind kind of the origin of television here. Early 20th century, the hearth is obviously USA, This is going to be, again, the Soviet Union, France, Japan, United Kingdom, and Germany. All different aspects had part of the television going, so you can't really put it together one exact spot. But we know for the most part kind of where all the different pieces of technology came from. You have a couple different examples here of early televisions throughout the world, very similar. Now the diffusion of television. America was by far the one place in the world that most people had the television. We could afford it. Many other countries around the world could not afford it at the time. We'll get to that a little bit. But because the rest of the world was kind of shattered by World War II, they didn't have as much money. They were rebuilding. The United States was now flourishing post-World War II, and we had this thing called disposable income, which is extra income. Income for fun things, leisure things. What did people do? They decided to buy a television with it. Amazingly, by 1954, over 80% of the televisions in the world were in the United States. So over 80% of the televisions in the United States in 1954 were in the United States. Give you a general overview here. Obviously Canada, the UK, France a little bit. Pretty much the entire television block right there. Moving on slowly. Okay, it's now going to start spreading by 1950 or 1970, excuse me, to the rest of the world. But notice that it's going to start going to developed countries first. This is the key aspect. Okay, a lot of money, a lot of exposure, a lot of access to that popular culture. Now the television is in the Soviet Union. Okay, a little more developed. Europe a little more developed. Australia. All right, these more developed places are now going to have more access to popular culture. Thus, popular culture and popular culture ideas are now going to start spreading throughout the world. But as you can see, there's still a divide in the world. So you're going to assume that you're going to have mostly folk culture here, mostly folk culture here, kind of for a variety of different reasons. By the 1980s, every new generation kind of comes out with a new television set. The key for this point is that it becomes less and less expensive. Okay, television set purchased in 1985, I believe my parents told me, was like $1,000 and sat on the living room floor. Okay, now today you couldn't even give that set away. We have screens that are 3 times as big and the fraction of the price, $200 to $300 compared to it. So when they become less expensive, now these televisions are starting to expand into all these less developed areas of the world. Okay, at one point they couldn't afford it, but now they can, and since they can afford it, now they are going to be able to access that television. Once they get access to that television, they are now going to be able to get access to all the different popular culture ideas and trends that are. Hopefully you can see here how television has followed the hierarchical diffusion pattern. A lot of money, a lot of access, you have the TVs. Okay, a little more money, now you're starting to get the television spread a little bit. Okay, but it's skipped over the areas of the world that are less developed. And again, now that they're cheaper, finally everybody is finally being exposed to it. Okay, you can make an argument that it's not hierarchical if it had not spread to Africa and South Asia. Okay, but now that it has, we can definitely see a pattern of that it is kind of definitely a type of expansion diffusion, which would be hierarchical for this example. So now the next way kind of popular culture spread is currently today through the internet. This was the same thing as the television. You could see the exact same pattern through the different countries, except that it was much, much, much faster. In the mid-90s, the United States had roughly 60% of all internet users in the world. Today, we only have 10%. It's not because we're using it any less. We're actually growing. It's still growing in the United States. It's just you have more and more people around the world that now have access to the internet. Hopefully, you guys can kind of see that here. Okay, same idea. United States, Canada, now you have these European developed countries, Australia, and finally it's moving into Africa and South Asia and the Middle East a little bit more. So once again, TV, internet, same thing. The only difference in the pattern is that the internet was much faster in diffusion. Overall here we have social media. So with the advent of social media here, keep in mind this is one way to kind of spread different culture and spread different ideas. That's kind of the essential part of why the textbook was really looking at social media. Another example here, United States has 50% of the global users of Facebook. I actually thought it would have been a little bit higher in 2006 that we had, but now we have the market share of only 20% in the world, which means Facebook has spread to more and more countries. So not only did they have the internet, now what are they going to be doing on the internet? Now Facebook is now spreading throughout. Very same idea, but notice how much faster Facebook kind of spread. You have obviously United States and Canada. Now you have Europe, but now you have more of Europe, more of United States, and now you're into a little more of the undeveloped countries or the developing countries where it has kind of spread. So YouTube here, the argument I'm going to try to make to you guys, do you think it's in the mid stage of the same model we just went over? Notice where it's going, where it's really popular, and where it now needs to go. Do you think it will follow that model? I think it will, obviously. It's going to spread a little bit more kind of globalization, popular culture, especially when you get into these developing countries over here. They see new ideas. It's a little more visual. They don't have to hear anything. They don't have to read anything. So it definitely will probably spread a little, very, very similar to Facebook and the internet. So the next part of this is kind of the culture wars. So before we looked at kind of how electronic media spreads popular culture and kind of holds back folk culture, this culture war is basically internal and external threats to folk culture that electronic media kind of helps to take over and embed and spread popular culture. The external threat is going to be the Western media dominance. That's us, the United States. That is Great Britain, United Kingdom, the rest of Western Europe, Canada, Australia. Those are the threats, the media in those places, not just the news, but also television, movies, and all of that aspect of culture. Usually people in the developing world embrace full culture, kind of feel challenged by electronic media and the diffusion of popular culture. Because of this, some governments and leaders in other countries are very fearful of the effects that these messages may have on their people. If they have new ideas that these people now have, now the government has to start listening to them. You could have an uprising, you could have a revolt. Basically, the new ideas make it more challenging for those governments to kind of control. So keep that in mind, that it makes it harder for the government to kind of control the access. The main thing about this is distrust in the Western media. 25 of the biggest broadcasting companies in the world are in the West. So you don't really have any other kind of influence. You just have basically one type of culture embedded there. And also, leaders of developing worlds kind of view this dominance as imposing American and Western values onto their society. Some of those societies or leaders in those societies do not want American and Western values to filter in. Sometimes it's fear that ideas could spread, but other times it's maybe the loss of the folk culture, and they might not have that folk culture, so they don't want American values and Western values to now spread there. A big one for this is kind of the expanded roles of women. You will notice developing countries don't have as much women in the workforce. They don't have a lot of women kind of being involved in traditional men roles or male roles, whereas the United States and Great Britain and Europe, you now have more women involved in the workforce. They're taking time to have kids, they're getting an education. Many different cultures are kind of fearful for that aspect. Now the question is, what do they do to restrict this? Well, many different African Asian countries really do criticize the freedom of the press here in America. They don't kind of like that idea. They like more of the state-run news. State-run news was basically the central government is running all the news. So anything they see or learn from the news, the government filtered it, they created it. It only has a government point of view here. That's what the POV means. Just simply a government point of view. Nobody else's view. So if the government doesn't do something correctly, or they do something inaccurately, or they harm people, they may not actually get the correct message because the government is the one actually producing the news. Here you have an example. North Korea is a very big one. North Korea has blocked out all media outlets. No media can get in, no Western media can get in. What this guy is obviously watching is government-sponsored media. So basically this is a government TV station. They're talking about the local economy there. In addition, these are just figureheads kind of within the government talking and probably only giving a pro-North Korea government point of view. So the government basically can do no wrong. Everything they send the message out is that everything's going good in the world or in North Korea, essentially. On the other hand, you have Moscow. Basically, this is the official news wing of the Soviet, or was the official news wing of the Soviet government when it was still around. Basically, all the news outlets at that time were banned. So it was a state-run agency. Any information they got, very similar to North Korea, was from the Soviet government. They had no access to the outside world unless they somehow had a satellite and were able to hook it up. But technology wasn't as prevalent then, especially for kind of your everyday citizen. So what does this do? This limits access to television, which limits access to having all these popular culture ideas kind of being embedded into your culture. One way to advent that is in block stations is these satellite dishes. Obviously, satellite dishes, you don't need to run through cable. Satellite dishes reach space, which you have all these are satellites, which are being sent from Western countries. So now they're slowly getting these ideas sent into the country. So not everything is perfect. They can't completely block everything out. A lot of this may be illegal. A lot of it may be legal as well, depending on the country. But for the most part, you can kind of assume that it probably wasn't legal. Here, these obviously people don't have cable companies, internet companies around here. One way to kind of get access is obviously to have a satellite, which you don't need as much wiring to kind of get access to that news media. Here's an example of here people in Nigeria. They collectively own to watch a television. Obviously, it shows that they're in a developing country. Not everybody can afford a television. And again, this is a satellite television, so they're all sharing it. That's the only possible way they can get any kind of popular culture or any ideas outside of their village or their local government. Another example here in Syria. Basically, here they're allowed to bypass the government TV by getting these satellites, and now they're able to kind of get any neighboring country. And also any broadcast that allows them kind of free access to those satellites to get whatever is being shown. Keep in mind the new threat here is social media. We're going to get to the Arab Spring here in a little bit where that became pretty popular. But some things that government try to limit in a lot of different countries. Political content, they don't want to hear anything about their government being bad or corrupt, so they try to block that out. Social media has a way of circumventing that a little bit. Social content, anything deemed too inappropriate, especially in Arab world countries or Muslim countries, anything that is sexually inappropriate or that might be kind of against a religion, gambling, drinking, smoking, all of that aspect. Other things in here, conflict security, and then basically internet tools as well. These are all different things that government try to limit. Obviously, email is a big one. You can't communicate with people from the other side of the world. If you could, then therefore you would have the news, or they could update you on what's really going on in the world, and not just simply having the government tell you what's going on in the world. Again, so not all these countries try to block the exact same thing. As you can see here, political content, hear anything wrong about communist China, they're going to try to block that to ensure their citizens don't hear anything. Same thing with Iran. In addition, we just talk about kind of autocratic governments. Clearly, you can see the people that kind of run and dominate everything don't want their citizens to really truly hear anything from the outside world about how they might be corrupt or how it might be a kind of an oppressive government. Social content, the thing I can kind of infer from this is you have a lot of Middle Eastern countries here. Social content, you're talking about gambling, drinking, any kind of sexually explicit things here. Women being involved in the workforce, a little more, that's all a little more restrictive in the Islamic religion, so therefore these places are a little more high on that. Conflict security, China's a big one, and then same thing with Saudi Arabia and Iran, very similar for the same reasons. Here you can send messages, you can send videos through email, so therefore it's very, very similar to kind of just general social content. So we're going to quickly look at a couple censorship and response case studies. These are always really good examples. When you hear case studies ever, keep in mind those are things that you could probably use in the future on free response questions. That's kind of what they're kind of tailored for. So here we are going to first look at Tiananmen Square. This is going to be China here. In the late 80s, thousands of pro-democracy students, remember China is communist, but these pro-democratic students flooded Beijing, basically demanding reforms to try to get rid of this communist state, the system. They disliked it. So they're kind of peacefully protesting throughout the country. However, the protests were violently dispersed by the military. Simply means that military of China came in. They didn't want any of the protesters protesting the pro-government there. So now how does this kind of lead to kind of today? Essentially, the Western media, the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, we started seeing these images. And basically, it did not play well here. It did not look very good for China. All of these images were national pictures that everybody kind of remembers. This is a big one here, the guy in front of the tanks. Mainly because of this massacre, these people are just simply there protesting, and the Chinese government comes out forcefully against that to try to calm any kind of revolution, revolt. But the Western media basically churns this out day after day after day after day. These are some of the most memorable pictures kind of in U.S. and world history, especially dealing kind of with our relationship with China. Obviously, closer image here of the tank man, very, very famous image. Again, peaceful protesters, but the big military of China kind of overthrowing these unarmed protesters did not sit well with many Westerners. This made China kind of look really, really bad for the rest of the world. So if you're wondering why China simply has this kind of great firewall where internet cannot get in or out, all these websites are kind of blocked, it's because of that. They do not want to have anybody really see what China does. Keep in mind, if you're over here in China and a bad incident from the government happens here, you're probably never going to hear about it because they're not going to report it on their government-run televisions. So the question I kind of have is, how does this impact memories of Tiananmen? Do you think they kind of want that never shown? So on YouTube, you can find images of this. You can find videos of it. Same thing with Facebook. Same thing with Twitter. So basically, they're trying to erase this entire incident out of Chinese history, and one of the ways to do that is by restricting all these websites that their citizens cannot get to. So kind of keep that in mind, the fear the government has of basically their citizens, quote, finding out kind of what they did in the past or what they might be doing now. A little more contemporary event is the Arab Spring with social media. We talked about this a little bit a few times in class. 5-6 years ago, 2011, countries kind of throughout the Arab world started to have these mini revolutions in all the different countries. Basically, the key element of it was social media. They couldn't control the social media because a lot of these cell phones had packages or deals from other countries, so therefore they could not really block that. So this is how they organized, this is how they protested, this is how they said meet here at 10 o'clock and everybody would get there. The local governments had no way of kind of stopping that. Thus, it kind of led to many different uprisings and protests because you had such strong organization because of this. In addition, the cell phone cameras on there allowed protesters to kind of show the violence to the rest of the world that many of these governments were kind of throwing upon these protesters here. So keep in mind why other governments who have seen this are going to be more fearful now of social media. So they've seen what social media can do. It can bring down kind of dictatorships, very autocratic governments, if you will, that don't allow their citizens to do much or have much say. So many other places are going to be a little more fearful of that. Again, everybody in the world now is kind of a journalist because we can film exactly what's happening. We see this a lot now, especially with a lot of different race, police issues. Everybody has a camera, everybody's around. Anybody can film something that can be shown as, quote, news to everybody around the world, and that is, again, very fearful, and another reason why these governments are going to start having more and more restrictions throughout the world.